Me and my husband embarked on a road trip across the Pacific Northwest several years ago. The journey itself was a 2-week trip from Tahoe City, California to Olympia, Washington. It was springtime, and we were very excited because we loved the rain. We had lived in Arizona for most of our lives, so when we moved to California for my husband's new job, we wanted to travel and experience something other than the desert. We drove a new Marbay Star RV and had a great time. We stopped at an RV park in Upper Oregon where we planned to stay for a few days because Oregon is one of my favorite states. It was already very late, and my husband was showering while I was making grilled cheese. Suddenly I heard a knock on the door. I've stayed in several RV parks and something like this had never happened unless you've talked to your neighbors beforehand and been friendly. But we had just arrived half an hour ago and hadn't spoken or introduced ourselves to anyone. I peeked out the curtain and didn't see anyone. 10 or 15 minutes passed, and I heard another knock. I peeked out the curtain again, and still didn't see anyone. I heard the shower being turned off, so I knocked on the bathroom door to ask my husband to check outside. But as I stood right outside the door, I saw a light shining through the window in our bedroom. I told my husband through the door about what happened, and he quickly got dressed and went outside with a bat. He did a perimeter check and said he didn't see anything. We moved our RV to a different spot, quite far from where we were originally parked. Initially, we sat on the couch to watch a movie and eat our grilled cheese. My husband fell asleep after a while, and I started cleaning up. I was washing dishes when I heard the RV door handle move as if someone was trying to open it. I froze, and then it stopped. I woke up my husband, and he checked outside the door again, but once again, there was nothing. The park we were in wasn't the biggest, so there weren't many places left to go. But we decided to move again. Both of us were very tired at this point. We parked as close to the exit as possible, and everything seemed fine. My husband was about to pass out, and the chewing gum I had taken 2 hours ago had kicked in. All we wanted to do was sleep. We turned on the kitchen light and the TV with low volume as a sort of deterrent and went to sleep, only to be woken up by my husband aggressively tapping me. I opened my eyes and saw him sitting on the edge of my bed. Apparently, he had heard a loud noise outside, and when he peeked out the window, he saw 2 men with something that looked like knives in their hands trying to open the front door. He had called the police, and they would be arriving soon. I got dressed and we waited, listening as the 2 men outside continued scratching and peering through the window. Several minutes passed, and we could hear them getting more frustrated as time went by. But then the noises suddenly stopped. There was a quiet atmosphere for a few minutes before the police finally arrived. The men were not found. The police said they would investigate, but it was clear that there were no leads. Another campground had a similar experience happen to them. It was also the only other RV that looked nicer in the park, so I'm pretty sure we were targeted. We left around 7 a.m. after the police finished making the report. Nothing was taken or severely damaged, so it didn't affect us too much, but it was still a very frightening experience. We ended up in a different RV park with better views and added an extra lazy day to our trip. We were very grateful that our RV had tight locks, because if they had been broken, chances are I wouldn't be here today. I am a 29-year-old man, and last year, I went out to northern Washington for a solo vacation. None of my friends enjoy camping at all, although I might not want to camp with them all the time, even if they did. It's something I've done alone all my life, and I find it's a way for me to enjoy life without stress and worry. Washington is one of my favorite camping states because it has so many forest and mountain areas, and overall is an amazing state for this type of journey. I decided to camp on a 3-day, 2-night camping trail. Essentially, I would hike during the day, then camp at night and repeat that for the duration of the trip. The first day and night of the journey went smoothly. Nothing significant happened at all. I hiked most of the way, then set up camp by the roadside. I woke up early just as the sun was rising and crawled out of my little tent. I began packing up all my gear and pulling the stakes from the tent, folding it. As I did this, though, I noticed grass behind the tent being pushed down. Walking over there, there were footprints. I glanced around briefly and looked up and around the trees. They clearly were made recently, likely last night while I was asleep. I looked back down and started to follow the trail. The prints were quite clear and led straight to the trail. It was confusing, especially because I was on a camping trail and my campsite was a considerable distance from the main trail. However, it seemed whoever it was just walked away after noticing my tent. After packing my tent, I did a quick perimeter check around the site to ensure there were no other footprints, then returned to the trail and continued along it. Most of the trail was dirt or gravel, so all footprints showed up well. Strangely though, there were no footprints along the trail as I walked the second half. I wondered where the person went, knowing that this was actually a one-way trail. After a while though, I had forgotten about it and just let my mind wander to other things. This climbing section had stunning views, so I took my time and just observed the nature around me. Eventually the sun started to set, and I had to set up camp again. This time, I chose to go further into the forest, hoping no one would visit me like they did the night before. Once I set up the tent, I made a small campfire pit and sat on the ground next to it. Watching the sunset near the campfire was one of the most calming things. It truly takes your mind to a better place, but it didn't last long. As the sun was almost fully set, I heard something walking towards me from the trees behind the tent. Slow and gentle footsteps, and they got closer. I quickly grabbed my bag and pulled out my heavy-duty flashlight along with my pistol, shining a beam of light into the darkness of the forest. The footsteps stopped. I moved the light to scan the entire area. For almost 30 minutes, I stood by the campfire looking in all directions, scared. I had never heard footsteps depart, making me extremely frightened and nervous because someone was still watching me. I didn't know what to do. I was alone and helpless with nowhere to go for safety. I thought about going back to the trail, but I was too scared to leave the campsite while it was so dark outside. I decided that enough was enough and retreated into the tent. I tried to come up with every possible explanation for what could be happening just to calm myself. I only lasted a few minutes in the tent though before I truly panicked and paranoid because I couldn't see around me. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, and even before I had a chance to turn on my heavy-duty flashlight, footsteps ran towards the forest coming right from behind my tent. I turned around and frantically turned on the light, not seeing anything except footprints in the ground and grass. I was panting, and my heart was pounding as I stood by the campfire and stared into the silent trees. I sat by the campfire with the pistol in hand for the remainder of the night. I flinched at every small sound, but eventually, the sun rose, and I felt safe seeing my tent under the sunlight. There were footprints again right behind it where I heard the footsteps. I didn't know how I didn't hear them walk to the tent, but I knew I had to leave. I packed everything up and finished the hike before sunset. I have no idea who was out there, why they were watching me, or what they wanted. My friend, whom I'll call James for privacy, and I were in Oklahoma for a camping trip almost 10 years ago. Now, we live further north, but still venture to various nearby states for weekend camping trips whenever we get the chance. This was just another journey where we found unmapped places to visit, planning to stay for 1 or 2 nights before heading back home. We've been doing this almost our entire lives, growing up with hiking and camping as our constant companions. We enjoy forging our own paths and discovering relatively unexplored areas to stay, so it's said that we should be more cautious. It was our first night there. We had hiked 4 hours from where we parked the truck deep into the forest on a poorly made trail. We stumbled upon a dilapidated and abandoned wooden and mud building with overgrown plants leading to it. It was a pretty cool find, and we thought it might have belonged to someone years ago. Something odd about it was that it seemed to have been burned down. Continuing with Char into the woods, we passed it and continued until we found a very small lake. Then we set up our camp along the line of trees up the hill from the shore. We made a small campfire pit, and even dragged some small logs to sit on. Then we chatted for hours, enjoying the view. After darkness enveloped us, we decided it was best to let the campfire die out, and then sleep. We chatted a while longer as the fire slowly dwindled and dimmed, until James stopped in the middle of his sentence and fell silent. "James!" I called his name and looked up to see him gazing behind me. He motioned for me to be silent, so I turned around and looked behind me, seeing nothing. "What do you see?" I asked, a little shaken by his demeanor. I didn't know. His response was looking around. He started to make me uncomfortable, which was not a feeling I usually got around him. If anything, he was usually the one not easily scared. The fire kept getting dimmer, making the forest around us darker. James grabbed a few sticks next to him and threw them to keep the fire burning a little longer. Not long after that, James locked his eyes from behind my back again. "What's going on, buddy? You're starting to scare me," I said, a bit shaken. He remained silent for a moment before speaking. "There's someone watching us," he said. I turned to look behind me again, but this time I saw something too small. Someone partially crouched next to a tree, staring our way. I turned to face James, and a few yards behind him, I saw another person standing behind a tree. A sense of shock and fear washed over me. It felt like a painful nightmare I was experiencing. James felt it too. I could see it in his eyes as we both looked around and saw more and more people standing and running among the trees around us. What made it even more frightening and unnerving was you could barely hear them move, like their footsteps weren't there. Both of us stood and looked around, observing 10 to 15 unidentified persons surrounding us. James shouted, asking what they wanted, but they didn't respond. I gripped my hunting knife, but it didn't make me feel any safer. Then some of them started to approach, becoming more visible in the dim light. They held long sticks that seemed like hunting spears and were barely dressed. When I saw these people approaching, even though they looked angry and wild, it made the situation scarier. One of them reached out and grabbed my arm, starting to pull me back. We slowly backed away, grabbing our bags, and moved away from them into the other side of the trees, where it seemed like none of them were there anymore. As we retreated slowly, checking around us, the entire group seemed more interested in our campsite than us. We walked as far as we could in the general direction. We later found a small place to hide for the night, although neither of us could sleep there. In the morning, we saw smoke rising from around where we set up the tent. We assumed they were the ones who burned the tent, and it also crossed our minds that maybe they were the ones who burned the dilapidated building we had seen. All right, we packed up and headed back to the truck driven by Ben directly home. At the time, research wasn't the easiest thing to do, so we left it as a terrifying experience that we might never understand. But recently we got some answers. James found that there actually were tribes living not far from civilization in many areas across the country. They often disliked outsiders or strangers traveling or staying in their territory. There are stories of them attacking campers, or burning their campsites to force them to leave, considering the possibility of such actions. In my opinion, James and I were actually lucky with our current encounter. We did more research in the areas we wanted to explore to ensure that the unmapped areas where we camped didn't belong to anyone else.